Right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our weekly Torah studies class for the Torah portion of Terumah, the timeless temple, bringing the message of the temple to every corner of life. So the Torah portion begins with the very important command to the Jewish people to build a Mishkan, to build the portable sanctuary that traveled with the Jewish people for the 40 years that they were in the desert, and then for a few hundred years when they were in the land of Israel. The command essentially also includes the Beis Hamikdash, the temple that was built in Jerusalem, that was destroyed twice, and God willing will be rebuilt once again with the coming of Mashiach. The Mishkan, the Beis Hamikdash, this really was the center of Jewish religious life for well over 1,000 years. It's where Jews gathered to celebrate holidays, personal occasions. It's a place where they went to see God and to be seen by God. It energized them. There was a tangible experience of godliness, holiness, spirituality at the temple. And the command is in this week's Torah portion. The command was not to build a general building with a structure that's of your choosing. There are very specific and precise instructions down to the very last measurement of every detail. We open with text number 1 from this week's Parsha. God spoke to Moshe saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and have them take for me an offering. From every person whose heart inspires him to generosity, you shall take my offering."
What page?
You do not have a book for this class.
This isn't. We don't have a book for this.
There is no book. There is. You can purchase one if you like, but I didn't order any because I incorporated the text into the PowerPoint.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
And this is the offering that you shall take from them: gold, silver, and copper, blue, purple, and crimson wool, linen and goat hair, ram skins dyed red, tachash skins, and acacia wood, oil for lighting, spices for the anointing oil and for the incense, shohem stones and filling stones for the ephod and for the choshen. And they shall make me a sanctuary, and I will dwell in their midst, according to all that I show you, the pattern of the Mishkan and the pattern of all its vessels, and so shall you do. Now, every single detail of the Mishkan is there for a reason, right? There's intense purpose behind it, the significance to it, because the temple was not just a place of holiness and godliness, but it also represented a model for how we can apply holiness and spirituality to our own life as well. Now, someone's just texting me. I want to make sure that they're not trying to join the class. All right, not class related. We'll get back to the class. So every detail, every structure, every measurement, there's something that you can learn from and that you can apply to our own lives today when it comes to our service of Hashem. We're going to look at a medrash. The medrash looks at the four of the materials that the Torah highlights and tells us that those four materials that the Torah commands us to build in the Mishkan actually represent four different eras, four different periods in Jewish history. So we go now to text number 2. This is Medrash Tanchuma, and we'll give a little bit of a bio on this Medrash. So it's a midrashic work bearing the name of Rabbi Tanchuma, a 4th century Talmudic sage quoted often in this work. Medrash is the designation of a particular genre of rabbinic literature, usually forming a running commentary on specific books of the Bible. Tanchuma provides textual exegesis, expounds upon the biblical narrative, and develops and illustrates moral principles. Tanchuma is unique in that many of its sections commence with a halachic discussion, which subsequently leads into non-halachic teachings. So that's the source, the Medrash Tanchuma. The gold used in the tabernacle corresponds to the kingdom of Babylonia, of which the verse states, "You are the head of gold." The silver corresponds to the kingdom of Media, Persia, as the verse states, "If it pleases the king, let it be written to destroy them, and I will weigh out 10,000 silver talents. That verse, of course, comes from the Megillah, which we are about to read next week for Purim. The copper corresponds to the kingdom of Greece, as it was the least powerful of them all. And the red dyed ram skins corresponds to the kingdom of Edom, as the verse states, and the first one emerged reddish. God said, though you witness 4 kingdoms boastfully dominating you, I will sow salvation for you from the midst of your servitude. So here we have a medrash. The medrash tells us that the 4 materials, for at least 4 of the materials that the Torah specifies that the Mishkan shall be constructed out of, represents 4 kingdoms, and those 4 kingdoms represent the 4 kingdoms and the 4 nations that have exiled the Jewish people. So the gold, the silver, the copper, and the dyed ram skins are paralleled to the 4 exiles. So let's briefly go through the history. In the year 423 before the Common Era, the first temple is destroyed by the Babylonians. The Babylonians conquer the land of Israel, they destroy the first temple, and they exile the Jews to Babylonia. This is exile number 1, the exile of Babylonia. For 51 years, the Jews are ruled over by the Babylonians until the Babylonians are conquered by King Darius, a Persian. It is under the reign of the Persians where the story of Purim takes place. So in 372 before the Common Era, the Persians conquer the Babylonians, and the Jews are now in exile under the Persians. Queen Esther, together with Ahasuerus, they have a child, Darius II. Darius II gives the Jewish people permission to return back to the land of Israel. The second temple is built, and the Jews have somewhat of an autonomy for a period of time. However, in the year 273, before the Common Era, the Ptolemaic kingdom, the descendants essentially of Alexander the Greek coming from Macedonia, they conquer the land of Israel. Power turns to the Syrian Greeks, and it's under the Syrian Greeks that the story of Hanukkah takes place. So that is our exile number 3, which is under the Greeks. In the year 61, before the Common Era, the Romans conquered the land of Israel and take over from the Greeks. And unfortunately, they destroy the second temple in the year 69 of the Common Era, and the Jewish people are once again exiled. So that's the fourth and the last exile, the exile of Rome, which we are currently experiencing now, and which will end with the coming of Mashiach. So the 4 materials, gold, silver, copper, and the ram skins correspond to the 4 exiles of Babylonia, Persia, Greece, and Rome. Now, the question which I have to imagine all of you are thinking right now is, what on earth is the connection between the gold, silver, copper, and the ram skins that the Jews were instructed to build the Mishkan, the tabernacle, in the desert? What does that have to do with the 4 kingdoms of Babylonia, Persia, Greece, and Rome? What do they have to do with each other? First of all, the command to build the Mishkan took place 1,000 years before any of these other exiles took place. How could there be a connection? How could there be a relationship? Even thematically, it doesn't seem to make sense. Why would the Medrash compare the Mishkan's construction to these tragic events, signaling the temple's destruction? The command about these 4 materials, the theme is the construction of a tabernacle, the construction of a temple. Yet the 4 exiles, they represent the destructions of the temple. So how can they be related on any level? We're going to return to this question a little later in the class. Right now, we're going to return to the actual command itself to build the Mishkan and to an anomaly in the verses that Rashi picks up on. Now, Rashi, we've mentioned him before, but it's always worth mentioning who is Rashi. Rashi is Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki. He was born in the year 1040. He passed away in the year 1105. He's the most noted biblical and Talmudic commentator. Born in Troyes, France, Rashi studied in the famed yeshivas of Mainz and Worms in Germany. His commentaries on the Pentateuch and the Talmud, which focus on the straightforward meaning of the text, appear in virtually every edition of the Talmud and the Bible. So this is the comment of Rashi. You shall take my offering. A rabbi said the word terumah, offering, is mentioned 3 times, indicating that 3 offerings are mentioned here. So Rashi is telling us that the Torah doesn't specify 3 campaigns, so to speak, but the fact that the word offering is mentioned 3 times indicates that there are actually 3 separate campaigns that are taking place. One is the offering of a half shekel per head, from which they made the sockets. Another is the offering of a half shekel per head for the community coffers, from which to purchase the communal sacrifices. And another is the offering for the tabernacle, each individual's donation. The 13 materials mentioned in this section were all required for the work of the Mishkan or for the garments of the priests, as you will find when you study them closely. So Rashi tells us that there are actually 3 separate campaigns that take place at the beginning of the Parsha. Campaign number 1 is a general campaign to raise the funds necessary for the construction of the entire Mishkan. Included in that are 13 materials: gold, silver, the ram skins, wood, all kinds of wool, and so on. That is a general campaign. The second campaign is more specific. The second campaign is a half shekel has to be donated. The purpose of that half shekel is to make the silver sockets that was the actual foundation for the Mishkan. The walls of the Mishkan were built out of tall wooden beams. Each wooden beam was placed in a socket. So the half shekel represented the silver for the sockets, which was the foundation of the Mishkan. And then the third campaign was another half shekel. The money raised from that half shekel was used to purchase the communal sacrifices that were going to be offered in the Beis HaMikdash. Now, I mentioned before that the Mishkan was designed to be a home for God, right? A spiritual center, a place where God could feel comfortable, where God can dwell, right? A place where God was palpable and tangible. But it was also meant to be a model for each and every one of us, that through looking and understanding and appreciating the construction of a Mishkan, we'll have the tools to make a Mishkan and a tabernacle, a dwelling place for God in our own lives. So every element within the Mishkan has significance and has a symbolic message for each and every one of us. So with this in mind, we go to text number 5, Pirkei Avos, Ethics of Our Fathers, from the Mishnah. Shimon the Righteous was among the last surviving members of the Great Assembly. He would say, the world stands on 3 things: Torah, the service of God, and kind deeds. The Rebbe looks at this Mishnah, which tells us that the foundation of the world rests on these 3 pillars: Torah, the service of God, and kind deeds. And we know that the Mishkan is supposed to be the model for how we are meant to make a dwelling place for God in our own lives. Therefore, they have to be connected. These 3 ideas, Torah, service of God, and kind deeds, they have to be modeled for us in the Mishkan. So the Rebbe says for us, the 3 collections for the Mishkan correspond to the three pillars upon which the world stands: Torah, Torah study, prayer, and mitzvahs. So let's break it down. Pillar and foundation number one is the study of Torah, right? It is quite obvious that the study of Torah, the text of the Torah, is the very foundation of Judaism itself. The Torah tells us what to do, how to do it, and why we should do it, right? The Torah is synonymous with Judaism itself. It is the foundation. Therefore, the Torah corresponds to the silver sockets, which is the foundation of the entire Mishkan. So which part of the Mishkan is a model and is a representation of how we're meant to behave in life? It's the sockets. The sockets correspond to the Torah, which is meant to be the foundation of our Jewish life. And that, of course, is the campaign of the half shekel. The second pillar is service of God. Service of God is interpreted to mean prayer, right? Prayer is called how we serve God. Prayer is what actually took place of the sacrifices that were in the Beis Hamikdash. When the temple was destroyed, our sages instituted formal prayer service to take place of the sacrifices that were in the temple. So obviously the second pillar, which is service of God, corresponds to the second campaign, which was the half shekel that was going to purchase the communal sacrifices. So the communal sacrifices correspond to prayer, which prayer took the place of the communal sacrifices. The third pillar is kind deeds, right? Kind deeds correspond to mitzvahs. When it comes to mitzvahs, how many mitzvahs are there? 613. There's a tremendous amount of mitzvahs. Mitzvahs come in all shapes, all sizes, all kinds of varieties. This corresponds to the general campaign to raise funds for the Mishkan and the 13 different ingredients and precious metals, items, tapestries, wools, and all the type of stuff that corresponded to the Mishkan. So the three pillars upon which the world stands, Torah study, prayer, and mitzvahs, corresponds to the campaign for the sockets, the campaign for the communal sacrifices, and the campaign for the general structure of the Mishkan. Any questions thus far? If you have a question at any point in time, if there's something that I'm saying is not clear, please unmute yourself and jump right in. The Rebbe further states that these three pillars, Torah study, prayer, and mitzvahs, can actually be broken up into two categories. Category number one are things that involve the mind and the heart. Intellectual and emotional experiences. This, of course, corresponds to the study of Torah and to prayer. The second section corresponds to action. Action, of course, represents the performance of mitzvahs. So now let's explain and appreciate these different categories on a deeper level. What is Torah? Torah represents divine wisdom. What happens when we study Torah? We are studying divine wisdom. What that essentially means is our mind is merging and becoming one with God's mind. A unity is formed with God when we understand a divine and godly idea, a Torah concept, a unity like no other. The Alter Rebbe explains this in his foundational book of Chabad Hasidic philosophy, the Tanya. Who was the Alter Rebbe? His name was Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi. He was born in 1745. He passed away in 1812. He was a Hasidic Rebbe, a halachic authority, and the founder of the Chabad movement. The Alter Rebbe was born in Lyozhna, Belarus, and was among the principal students of the Maggid Mezrich. His numerous works include the Tanya, an early classic containing the fundamentals of Chabad Hasidism, and the Shulchan Aruch Harav, an expanded and reworked code of Jewish law. So this is the Alter Rebbe's comment about the study of Torah. When the mind conceives and comprehends a concept with its intellectual faculties, it grasps the concept and encompasses it so that the concept is contained within the mind. The mind, for its part, is also surrounded by the concept. For example, when a person understands a halach in the Mishnah or Talmud fully and clearly, his mind encompasses and grasps it, while simultaneously being encompassed by it. Now, halacha is the wisdom and the will of God. So when a person's mind masters it, he is grasping the will and wisdom of the Holy One, blessed be He, whom no thought can grasp, nor his will and wisdom, except when they are contained in the laws that have been set out for us. Simultaneously, his mind is encompassed by the divine will and wisdom. So the Alter Rebbe makes two very interesting points thus far in this excerpt. Number one is, God is infinite, God is transcendent, God cannot be grasped by the human mind, He is above anything that we can do. However, God put Himself in the Torah that He gave us. The only way that we could actually grasp, hold on to something divine is through the study of Torah. When we actually understand an idea, we are understanding a divine idea. And that forms a bond, a unity, an element of grasping onto God that otherwise would not be available to us. This is a wonderful union, like which there is none other, and without parallel anywhere in the material world. A union of complete oneness from every side and angle. When we study Torah, when we understand Torah, there is a merging, there is a bonding, there is a union between ourselves and God that is most deep and profound. This, of course, is why Torah study is so valued, why it's so important, and that we're taught to utilize every spare second that we can to study Torah because of the profound spiritual significance that we're able to achieve through the study of Torah. Then we move on to prayer. Right? Prayer is another profoundly spiritual experience. It's not as much of an intellectual experience as Torah study is, as it is an emotional experience. We go to the Talmud for text number 8. The verse states, to love the Lord your God and to serve him with all your heart, which is the service of God that is performed in the heart. It refers to prayer. Prayer is meant to be a profoundly emotional experience. Naturally, what is a person drawn to? What is a person attracted to? Self-preservation and self-gratification. Those are the great loves that a person is born into. Davening is a time where we try to cultivate a love towards more refined things, to more spiritual things, to more godly things. Davening is the time where we work on sensitizing our heart and arousing it to fulfilling its mission and purpose for that which is created. All right, we're not up to text number 9 yet. Okay. Mitzvahs, however, are different. Now, while mitzvahs certainly can have a spiritual aspect to them, you can bring an intellectual and emotional approach into mitzvahs. However, mitzvahs by definition are not intellectual and emotional. Mitzvahs are action-oriented experiences. So much so that even if a person doesn't bring any intellectual or any emotional energy to the performance of the mitzvah, they nevertheless still get the credit for doing the mitzvah. Because the main thing when it comes to mitzvah is the act. The intellectual and emotional experience, that's just a bonus. When it comes to Torah study and prayer, it is an intellectual and emotional experience. When it comes to mitzvahs of action, it's an action-oriented experience that can and certainly should be enhanced by the intellect and the emotions. So Torah study and prayer both involve an experience that takes place within a person. By contrast, the third pillar, kind deeds, which include all the mitzvahs, is unique in that it doesn't take place within a person, but rather involves physical objects used in mitzvahs, so that something, even as it remains a physical object, can become as holy as the object of a mitzvah. So Torah is an exercise of the mind. Prayer is an exercise of the emotions. Mitzvahs are simply an exercise of the body performed with objects outside of oneself. Now, this leads us to a critically important question. At least I thought it did. It's supposed to be, all right? It was on the PowerPoint before. The question is, which is more important? Which of these two methods and ways of serving Hashem is more central to our relationship with God? Which is more central to our role as Jewish people in impacting and affecting the world? The Rebbe teaches us that it's mitzvahs. Why? Because mitzvahs are performed in the world, affect the world, and transform the world. Text number 10 from the Rebbe. This is actually from the Alter Rebbe again. We know from our sages that the purpose behind the creation of this world is God's desire for a home in the lowest realms. Thus, this tangibly physical world was created. This tangible physical world was created. It is the lowest realm. There is no place where God is so hidden and that is so dark, full of klippas that literally oppose God, declaring, I and nothing else exists. The purpose that God created a world is that we should make a dwelling place for him in the lowest world, the physical world. The physical world conceals, hides, denies the presence of God. When we do mitzvahs in the world with physical objects, we demonstrate the truth and the reality of God and that the world belongs to God, and we make the world a welcoming place for God and a home for God. So this is the supremacy of action-oriented mitzvahs over Torah study and prayer. Does that mean that Torah study and prayer is not important? Of course not, right? We have to develop our Torah study. We have to develop our prayer. If we don't develop our own spirituality, then with what and how are we going to do mitzvahs? So Torah study and prayer are critical. Why are they critical? Because that is what allows us to do mitzvahs. And mitzvahs are the main event. It's the mitzvahs that we do that have the biggest effect, transforming the world and fulfilling the purpose for creation. With this in mind, we could now go back and revisit the four items, the four materials that are utilized in the construction of the Mishkan, that the Medrash tells us parallel the four exiles, the exile of Babylonia, Persia, Greece, and of Rome. What is the purpose of the gold, the silver, the copper, right? The ram skin. What's the purpose? The purpose of those materials is in order to build a Mishkan, which is to make a dwelling place for God. That is what a Mishkan is all about. The Mishkan is there for us to fulfill the purpose that God created the world and to make a dwelling place for God. However, we were not successful in fulfilling that mission. We made a temple. There was a Mishkan. There was a Beis HaMikdash. It was godly. It was holy. It was spiritual. But the world was not transformed. Ultimately, we failed, and the buildings and the structures were destroyed, and we were sent into exile. When we're sent into exile, does that mean the job is over? We failed. We're finished. That's it? Of course not. We have exactly the same mission that we had when we were in the Mishkan and when we were in the Beis HaMikdash. We have exactly the same mission now when we're in exile. And we use the model of the Mishkan for how we are meant to serve God in exile. And it turns out there happens to be an advantage of being in exile versus when we had the temple and the Mishkan. Now, I'm not saying that it's good that the Mishkan and the temple were destroyed. God forbid, absolutely not. It would have been much better if we would have succeeded with a temple. However, the result of it being destroyed is the Jewish people were sent into exile and were spread all over the world, which means we have an opportunity to do mitzvahs in Babylonia and in Persia and in Greece and in Rome, which represents today the entirety of the world. We have an opportunity to make a dwelling place for God in this world, not only in Jerusalem, not only in the land of Israel, but we have an opportunity to bring the message of Torah, mitzvah, spirituality, purpose, holiness, godliness to all four corners of the world as a result of the exile. Good. All right. This was the slide that I thought was 2 slides ago. It happened. Text number 13. This explains the idea in the Medrash that the gold and silver of the tabernacle correspond to the 4 kingdoms. The purpose of the donated materials was to build a home for God in this world. This is most fully accomplished, not so much by building the physical tabernacle, a place of overt spirituality, but by our efforts during the exile, an era gripped by the physical trappings of the world, by our efforts to transform this degree of brute materialism to holiness, we uplift the most crass elements of the physical reality. The Mishkan's mission continues in the 4 exiles as we are spread out all over the world, continuing the work of building a divine home in those places. So the Medrash is telling us the materials that were utilized to build in the Mishkan were not only for the Mishkan. They weren't only for that building and that structure and that time and that place, but those materials were also for the Babylonian exile and for the Persian exile and for the Greece exile and for the Roman exile. Because the purpose of the Mishkan, the mission of the Mishkan, continues with us to this very day, as we are meant to make a dwelling place for God in this world. The ultimate reason why Torah study and prayer are so great is because it leads a person down the path to mitzvah observance. So the message that we get from this whole experience, right, as beautiful, as holy as a Mishkan is, as spiritual as the Mishkan, at the end of the day, the goal is to transform the world. As important and as valuable as Torah study is, and as prayer is, it's only valuable in the extent that it leads us to the performance of actual mitzvahs in this world. So what's the bottom line? What's the message from this whole discussion? Is that action is the main thing. Is Torah study important? Yes. Is davening important? Absolutely yes. Why? Because it gives us the ability to perform and to act and to do. Because at the end of the day, the action is the main thing. And this idea is expressed beautifully in text number 14, which is from the first book that the Rebbe ever published. It's called the Hayom Yom, and it's a calendar that has a Hasidic saying for each day. The Alter Rebbe received the following teaching from the Tzaddik Reb Mordechai, who had heard it from the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov was the founder of the Hasidic movement. The Baal Shem Tov said, a soul may descend to this world and live 70 or 80 years in order to do a Jew a material favor and certainly a spiritual one. This is such a beautiful and powerful idea. Who is the Rebbe talking about in this text? We're talking about even a tzaddik, a righteous and holy person who spends all day davening, who spends all day studying Torah, who is immersed fully in the intellectual and the emotional world of spirituality. Yet, why did this person come down to this world? A person who possessed the most intense spirituality of study of Torah and of prayer is to do a favor for another person. It's not for the Torah study and for the prayer. Yes, you need the Torah study and you need the prayer. But at the end of the day, why are we here? What is it all about? It's to do that good deed. It's to do that mitzvah. It's to transform the world and make it a better place. We have to remember that first and foremost. So we'll conclude with a great story. The story takes place in a Chabad yeshiva in Samarkand, Uzbekistan. It's taken from a book written by Rabbi Hillel Zaltzman. He writes about his own experiences growing up in Uzbekistan. He says, once during a Hebrew writing lesson, my friend Mordechai Goldschmidt forgot his inkwell. I didn't want to let him dip his pen into my inkwell and told him that he should have brought his own. Right now, you can imagine, I'm sure we've all had exactly the same experience in life where we said, oh, you forgot yours? You should have brought your own. I'm not sharing. Right? We've all done this at some point. Reb Bencha, that's his teacher, noticed this, but said nothing. After a while, he asked me, Hilke, did you say Moda'ani today? Moda'ani is the first prayer of the day, an acknowledgement of God recited immediately upon waking up each morning. I said that I had. Reb Bencha asked me to explain the Moda'ani, which I did to the best of my ability. Now again, Moda'ani is thanking God for restoring your soul and waking up in the morning, right? That's what it means. Reb Bencha stopped me in the manner he reserved for chastising someone and said disapprovingly, that's not what it means. And he went on to explain it. Moda means selflessness. This means that when a friend asks for ink, you give it to him. Ani means that when your friend asks you for a pen, you must give him a pen. And so he went on to explain the rest of the words in a similar fashion. Now do you know the meaning of Moda'ani, he concluded. Again, so beautiful. He says, what is Moda'ani? What is spirituality? What is prayer? What is any of this stuff? If you're not going to lend your friend and help out your friend and give your friend something, you don't get it. You didn't say anything. It's meaningless. What's prayer? What's spirituality? What's Torah? If you don't have the ability to help and reach out to your friend and do a favor, do a mitzvah for someone, you got nothing. He says these scenes typified his method of education, and they have remained etched in our souls for life. So what's the bottom line? Study Torah every spare second you can. Daven every day. Grow and develop that spiritual side of yourself, absolutely. But most importantly, do mitzvahs, help other people. Don't wait until you have perfected your knowledge of Torah and your spiritual sensitivity and your davening before you incorporate more and more mitzvahs into your life. Because at the end of the day, mitzvahs are the main thing. Mitzvahs is what it's all about. Action is the main thing. We have to grow in our Torah study. We have to grow in our prayer. But don't wait till we achieved some type of spiritual perfection before you incorporate more mitzvahs into your life. Incorporate mitzvahs into your life today. And ultimately, the spirituality is going to come. All right. Any questions, comments? All right. Satisfied customers. Yes, Mitchell.
No, I'm fine, thanks.
All right. See, when you unmute yourself, I get so excited.
Oh.
You're going to ask me a question. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Enjoy the rest of the evening. And God willing, we'll see you all soon. Be well.
Have a good day.